So for this part of the project, you're going to be exporting out your terrains. Now remember, I have multiple terrains that are in my scene. You probably only have one, but this process is going to be true whether you've got one or two or 10, or if you are going to be exporting out multiple scenes that have different terrains in them. The one big thing about this is that we have to make sure before we do our export that we have gone through and that we've checked and that we have good file naming, because we can't have everybody that's attached to a project export out terrain and then terrain 1, terrain 2, terrain 3, because it's going to be difficult for us over time to figure out what terrains we're actually looking at. So you need to make sure that before you export this out that your terrains have been turned into prefabricated objects. Remember that all that you do to do that is you grab it and drag it down and into the space down here. You'll be able to tell that it's a prefab because it turns blue. The other big thing that you got to do is make sure that your terrain name down here at the bottom, as well as up here in the scene, that those terrain names actually tell you what these terrains are, and that your scene name is whatever the scene name is supposed to be based on the file naming conventions that we have told you need to be a thing. We can't have everybody in the project potentially export out something that's a sample scene, and we can't have everybody in the project export out something that says terrain, because then we're going to be overriding each other's files potentially, and we definitely don't want that to be a thing. So that you can see why this turns into an issue pretty quick, if I came up here to assets and I went down to where it said export package, it's going to tell me about all the things that it's going to export out. And if you look, I have new terrain 1 and new terrain, but we don't know which one of those is which. Now, in this particular case, Unity is going to add, I mean, this is not just for this particular case, but Unity is going to add a number at the end for whatever is the newest thing that's been created. And because we only have like two things that are in this scene, it's not that big of a deal. We know that this new terrain asset right here is actually the terrain Lake Pueblo State Park merged, not a prefab, just the terrain. And this one right here we know is going to be the high contrast version. But if we didn't know that and we didn't check before we actually exported this out, it's entirely possible that somebody else is going to bring something into our project that's called new terrain, and that somebody else is going to bring something in that's called new terrain 1. And then we won't be able to tell what those things actually are and whether or not things were being overwritten. So before we actually do this export, we're going to come down here to the bottom and we're going to go and we're going to change the name of new terrain. You can click on the name down here, and what we're going to do is we're going to say terrain Lake Pueblo State Park T. And then we're going to do this one, and we're going to say terrain Lake Pueblo State Park merged, high contrast. Notice that I'm keeping the capitalization of whatever the name was up here the same, and I'm going to put a T at the end of this. What that's going to do is that's going to let us see what are the terrains that are just the terrains and what are the terrains that are the prefabs, and we'll be able to actually do some work with these things in a little while when you get it into the project. Now we're going to come up here to where it says assets. Make sure that you actually have your entire scene selected, and you're going to come up here to where it says assets, and you're going to go to export package. And note that now we have things that actually look like they're a whole lot better named for whoever else we're going to be working with on the project. It's also important for you to do this for yourself, because if you leave and you don't work on this project again for, a couple of weeks, and then you come back, or you haven't worked on this project in a couple of years and somebody asks you to retrieve files or whatever, you might not remember what new terrain 1 is. And so it's important to make sure that you've got your names down. At the end of this, what you're going to do is make sure that this says include dependencies, and you're going to hit export. Then it's going to ask you, where do you want to put this? And what you're going to do is you want to put this on the inside of wherever it was that you had your height map data, because that way we can keep both the Unity terrains and all of the stuff that goes with it together with the actual height map data that we originally used, and we can give that entire folder over to other people in the project. So you don't want to have this be something where you actually put it on the inside of this particular game object. We got to make sure that it's in wherever the height map data information was. So again, you would go and you would find where that height map data was that you were using, and you would make sure that you save it in here. Now this is going to you need to make sure that this is named appropriately too. And so you're going to call this whatever the name of the terrain is that you are creating. For me, it's Lake Pueblo State Park. And then I'm going to put in height map terrains UP, which is for Unity package. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save that. And what it's going to do is in that height map data folder, it's now going to have something that looks like this. And this is a Unity scene that other people will be able to use to import your height map data in order to have your terrains be something that they can use in their project.